Hello, everyone. My name is Anabel Dumlao. I'm very, very happy to be with you today. I'm very happy also to welcome the subject matter expert of this webinar, Joao Adao, who will be with me today. We will introduce Joao in a while. I am signing in from Madrid, Spain. I hope all of you are fine, are doing well, and are ready to join this conversation. You will see that there will be a section at the end of our webinar for questions and answers, but feel free to drop in your questions in the chat section of this webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Joao Adao. Please, can you show yourself to the audience? And I will start with a question to you, which is, I don't know if it's provocative or not, Joao. I'll ask you a second question, which will allow you to provide to the audience a bit your background. But first, so the title of this webinar, Digital Transformation. Why are we still talking about digital transformation? One would think that in the era of artificial intelligence, like I feel that we've been talking about this long enough. So why do you think it would be relevant to our audience to keep talking about the 5 key insights to that?
Hi, Anabel. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for connecting and for your interest in this subject. It's a subject that Anabel and I are both very passionate about. So why are we still talking about this? I think as context, I would start by saying something I heard. I think it was the Prime Minister of Canada had said it, but it's been attributed to other people as well, that today is the slowest day that we will ever live for the rest of our lives. So pace of change is only going to get faster. And it's also the fastest day we've ever lived, if you think back to the rest of our life. So it's accelerating and it'll only continue to accelerate. So that is the reason why companies, individuals first, and companies need to evolve and transform. And this digital technology is the biggest driver of the speed of change. Now, the reason we're still talking about it, first of all, it's because companies need to adapt, but the reason they haven't yet been able to adapt and why approximately 80% of digital transformation projects fail is because they usually attack what is most visible, which is processes, systems, structure, the things that are more visible and more easy to change and to move. I'll change this system for this system. What the majority of projects fail to acknowledge and address and get into is the culture of the company, the less visible, the more invisible piece of how companies work and behave and what's incented. And at the root of that, how the individuals in the organizations think and behave and react and how their mental models are. So the reason we're talking about this is because companies need to. The reason they're not being successful is because they're approaching the visible part, not the most fundamental piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you, Joao. I totally relate to that very, very clearly. It sounds like when you talk about digital transformation, you want to do digital, right? And what I'm hearing you say is that the key, and probably this is a sneak preview of the 5 key insights that you're going to share with us today, the key would be, look, it's not just about doing digital, which is great. It's how are you being digital, right? You're talking about the more invisible aspect of this transformation. So I totally get that. So can you please share with the audience, why are you talking about key aspects of digital transformation?
Well, first of all, because I'm very passionate about the intersection of business and psychology and sociology and strategy and culture, all these things that are usually languages that don't translate very well or don't talk to each other in a very easy way. It's my biggest passion to find where those languages do talk to each other. So my background, I've actually been in two, I would say, extreme sides of this digital transformation spectrum. I was at Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, which is one of the most successful by any measure digital native companies in history. I was there for a few years. And before that, I was at a company that bought many Yellow Pages companies. So Yellow Pages, for those of you who
Oh,
are too young to know, or these really big fat yellow books where people used to go and find phone numbers for the plumber and for the dentist and for all the products and services that they needed, that quickly became obsolete with the rise of the internet. And the company, so obviously the product was becoming very, very quickly obsolete, but what the company had was this tremendous channel access to hundreds of thousands of small and medium-sized businesses that had no marketing department, had no clue how to advertise online, and so needed help. So the premise of the business was, okay, let's help these thousands of companies get online because we have the relationship and the trust. But what I quickly found out was it was not, as I said at the beginning, it was not a technical challenge. It wasn't about developing new digital expertise. It was mainly a cultural challenge. It was mainly about how do we change a monopoly that used to be the only option for that plumber to be found because it was the only place people would find numbers. So it was intrinsically a monopoly, or it worked like a ministry. And how do you transform that monopoly into a digital agile competitor? How do you transform a product cycle that is annual, because they would issue the book once a year, to something that is every day you need to be reading market information and adjusting your product offering? And how do you transform a company like most monopolies that was very internally focused and looking at their own internal processes to one that is externally focused and that develops channels to listen to the customer needs in a much more natural way? That was tremendous cultural challenge, and actually a tremendous experience, very, very exhausting, but a tremendous learning experience. And it's actually the root of the source of many of these insights, as well as going back to Facebook, Facebook being a source of these insights from the side of a company that was already born digital and already had many of these insights inside their culture.
what a nice combination, right? Of someone becoming digital and having to transform almost through external forces, and someone being born digital, right? And being a digital native. Well, it's a luxury to count on your presence today, Joao, and being able to share those 5 key insights. So highly relevant. And the audience and those who registered, like, feel free to ask Joao any questions. I'm going to be battering him with some questions myself. So, Joao, so what are those key insights that you gathered from this beautiful mesh of experiences?
So I'll start with the first one. If you agree, we'll go one by one. The first one is build a horizontal organization. And what this means is it can be an organizational structure insight in terms of how do you reduce layers, how do you get the leaders closer to the ground. It could be that, but it's not as simple as just eliminate the layers and put everything horizontal, because that has lots of problems of its own. There's parallel kind of informal hierarchies that arise if you just simply eliminate the layers. There's lots of tests going on right now with pods where they're given a lot of autonomy. So there's still a lot of learning going on around what is the replacement for the traditional vertical organization. The biggest part of the insight is that the vertical organization, as we've known it for 50 years, is obsolete. And the reason it's obsolete, there's actually 3 different reasons it's obsolete. The first is that if you think about the traditional industrial companies of 20, 30, 50 years ago, the leader was by definition the person that knew the most about the business, because they had gone up through the ranks, they had done everything in the company, they had gotten a lot of experience, and the change was not as big. 40, 50 years ago, change in products and consumer behavior, et cetera, wasn't very great. So the leader was the one who knew the most. So it made sense for the person who had the most knowledge to be at the top making the decisions. That is no longer true. The leader is no longer the one who knows the most. Very often, he's one of the ones that knows the least, because change is so quick, because technology is very quick. So that is the first reason the vertical organization is obsolete. There needs to be shorter distance between the leader who needs to make a decision, because you still need a hierarchy to make final decisions, to the ground, the younger people, the ones who are early adopters, the ones who are on the ground, the ones who are adopting the new changes quickly. So the first reason it's obsolete is the leader no longer knows more. The second is the Generation Z and the young people who are in the lower levels hierarchically are the ones who know the most. So how do we invert the order of who's speaking up the more? That is a vertical organization that no longer works. And the third is the speed of change. It was okay to have several layers in a vertical organization because change was so slow. So we could afford the loss of agility and the cumbersomeness of that organization. An organization simply can't afford the layers today because change is too quick. So you need to do that. So an insight that I have from Facebook is Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO and founder, has and you have the slide there projecting, has a Q&A or an all hands every single week. Every Friday at the same time, he holds a Q&A for, at the peak, today it's fewer employees because they've had several rounds of redundancies, as most technology companies. But at the peak, there were 100,000 employees who all had the option to connect directly to talk to this Q&A. And any employee, the one who had been there 10 years or the one who had joined a week ago, had the option to ask Mark Zuckerberg a question. That is pretty much unheard of someone who started a week ago being able to talk to the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. The reason he did that, there were two reasons he did that. One was to listen directly without the kind of the filter of the management layers, to listen directly to what was bothering people, what was on people's minds. But even more importantly, back to this build a horizontal organization, even more importantly, it was a very strong symbol of psychological safety to speak up. Mm-hmm. If you just joined this company and you can ask the CEO anything you want, from strategy to compensation to the food in the kitchen, then this is a place where I can speak up in meetings as well, where I can tell my manager, I don't think this product idea is the right thing because I'm using it and that's not how I use it. So those different elements in the culture. The other one is my leadership team was very heterogeneous, from people with 25 years experience to people of 2 years experience. And they both sat at the leadership team table and they both had the same amount of space and time, because there was a deliberate intention to reduce the space between the top and the bottom and to create a space for people to feel safe to speak up, even though they weren't the leaders or they weren't at the top of that organization.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense, Joao. At least for me, it sounds like the arguments in favor of having a flatter organization are clear. They sound logical in the 21st century. However, how come the hierarchical organization? Because mind you, and pointing towards how you explained at the beginning that part of the keys to these digital transformation efforts is invisible, right? And it reminds me of an anecdote, an executive of a company that's a client of Excellence. We've been in the culture transformation space like forever, 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. So we've talked with a lot of executives, a lot of leaders in the tops of these hierarchical organizations. And he told me one thing. It's like they did all this beautiful renovation of the headquarters, no walls, no offices anymore. There's not status symbols of having the corner office. That was a thing of the past. Right now, like, everybody was equal flatter. And he told me this: I may not have walls surrounding me for my, I don't have an office anymore, a physical office. However, the office goes with me. So there are invisible walls. It goes to show the power of culture, right? You may make symbolic changes, but there's still something, there's a weight about how things are done and how things are expected to be here, right? And so if you're still expecting your boss to be the smartest in the room, right, it's kind of gonna get in the way. So I'm curious to understand from you, like, why do you think, if there are such clear reasons for a flatter organization, why is hierarchy still in vogue?
I think, to your point that culture is so deeply ingrained that it takes a long time to change. To that point, what aggravates it even further is the ones who are in a position of power to change those things. They are the ones that unconsciously don't want to change. If I'm a leader who's made it up through the ranks and I finally made it, it's difficult for me to say, okay, now I'm actually going to give up my corner office, whether it's physical or virtual. Now I'm going to give up, my right to be the one who speaks up in the meeting and the power that I express by making all the decisions. I think that's in addition to it's very difficult to change those beliefs and those behaviors that we have deeply ingrained, and organizations are like a large person with lots of different ingrained norms and beliefs. On top of that, the ones who need to be courageous and make those changes have the most to lose from an ego perspective and from a personal identity perspective.
Yeah, it's kind of a loss of status, and probably you said it, probably not even consciously. It's probably something that's working in their belief system, but it's not necessarily what they preach. So what would be your second insight then, given the power of these beliefs?
So the second insight actually goes very much to this part, to these last questions you were just asking me around. How do you make this shift, and how do you go from intellectual understanding to a deeper understanding? Is what I call be part of the problem. And be part of the problem is it's a reflection, and you know this well because at Excellent you help clients understand this and become more self-aware of this, become more conscious. We have, as human beings, this is human nature, we have this this big incentive since we're very young to be innocent, to be victims, right? So when we're young, oh, something fell from the glass fell from my hand. It's not that I wasn't holding it correctly. It's the glass decided to fall out of my hand. So since we were very young, that makes us feel safe, makes us feel innocent. We're a victim of some external factor. Mom and dad can't get mad at me because I did something wrong. So I'm innocent. The problem is, as we grow up, we continue looking for that nice comfort of innocence. And so we continue expressing problems with a victim energy. And so, for example, in an organization, I'm sure you've seen this too many times, different departments blaming each other. It's like, oh, the sales says, oh, no, it's marketing's fault. They don't know what the hell the customer wants. Marketing says, oh, sales doesn't know how to sell. So it's always somebody else's fault. Why? Because of this deeply programmed need for us to be safe. The problem with that, so that's okay, and it's great for us to understand that that's where it comes from. The problem with that is, as long as you're not part of the problem, then you cannot be part of the solution. If I'm in sales and the only problem with our inability to sell our products is that marketing doesn't know how to prepare the collateral, then guess what? Until magically the whole marketing department changes, we're going to continue not selling our products. So if I'm not part of the problem, I'm not part of the solution. So be part of the problem means shifting the language to say, instead of marketing is useless, they have no clue what to do, how about I say, I have not yet been able to show to marketing what customers need and what would be our best way to show them that our products fill those needs better. So all of a sudden, it's uncomfortable because now I'm no longer in that child, the childish innocence of it's somebody else's fault and I'm safe. But it's incredibly more empowering because now I'm in a space where I can start exploring avenues. And there's a great question that I ask myself many times a day, I'm sure, which is, what is my best response to this challenge? And that's the only question that matters, because that's like a short circuit to that victim mindset that arises in us naturally because we're human beings. What's my best response to this challenge? So that shifts the energy from wanting to blame someone to what can I do about it? And then even more, what have I done to contribute to this? Because many times it's not only that I'm sure there's something I can do about it, but many times I've actually contributed to whatever it is I'm describing about someone else. So that's a second insight. And actually, I saw this a lot when in the ex-monopoly case I was telling you about. There was very much this victim mentality, again, because it's human nature, of a monopoly that had been incredibly successful for many, many years. All of a sudden, the revenues and profits were shooting through the in a very linear way, and it was just a matter of time before the company went out of business. It was easier for people to be victims and to say, oh, the market's changed. Oh, the customers don't call anymore. Oh, this digital thing, and remain powerless if all you do is complain about what's changed.
Mm-hmm.
When that language started shifting around what is our best response to this challenge, well, we can strike partnerships with people like Facebook and Google. We can hire people that have done this before. We can train people who all of a sudden there's a spectrum of things we could do, but we haven't even seen. It's like doors that where the lights were off and lights start going on in front of certain doors. When you're a victim, all the lights are off. You see no doors. When
Mm-hmm.
you start changing the language, there's a few doors, and then it's the process of finding which ones are better than others. But that's the second insight.
I can get that, right? How being disrupted by a digital native can bring out the victimism, the victim type of language of, oh my gosh, it's the market, it's the new trends. Like how can we keep up with this? While your suggestion on your key insight is becoming a part of the problem makes you a player in that and opens up possibilities. Probably doesn't give you the answer per se, but actually heightens the chances of you finding that solution. Okay, that's a very interesting one. Any other insights that you gathered from your experience in this space?
I think I love the word conscious, and you talk a lot about conscious business, and I think it's really about the self-awareness, because it's being aware that it is human nature to be a victim, and moving to the third insight, there's another human nature, which is believing my perspective. So let me. Sorry, I was skipping to number 4, but let me go through 3 first, which is a good transition into 4, which is the third insight is to have a hard conversation, because as human beings, again, going back to the consciousness and the self-awareness, as human beings, we don't feel comfortable addressing conflict. We don't feel comfortable talking about something that you and I disagree with. So we avoid the hard conversation. We avoid the conflict. For successful companies to stay successful, because a company can be successful for a short stint of time, but then, as we said before, change is happening so quickly, it's difficult to sustain. To sustain it, you need to sustain 3 different levers. You need to sustain the business results, which is the it. You need to sustain the collaboration among the people. We're a tribal species, so we need to feel like we belong, and there's a trust environment and people have our backs. And we need to be aligned with our own principles and values, and so there's an individual kind of alignment there as well. So on all 3 of those dimensions, having a hard conversation is critical, because if you don't have a hard conversation, the results suffer. Because if there's something we need to fix in terms of our product offering, in terms of our go-to-market strategy, then competition will solve it before we do, or the market, like in the monopoly case, the market will go away from us and stop buying, so we'll go out of business. So having a hard conversation is critical for the business results. Having a hard conversation is critical for the we dimension, for the collaboration, for the relationships. Because if we're not talking about the important things, then relationships, this is an intuition we have, relationships become superficial and fake and thin and not deep, and it becomes something that we don't feel a part of. And individually, if I go home after a day where it was all polite, fake, superficial conversation, that's not a place that I want to be contributing to. So that's the reason why having a hard conversation is such a critical part of this. And at Facebook, I'll give you an example of what I saw at Facebook, again, using it as a digital native, something that they have more naturally ingrained. Sheryl Sandberg was the the chief operating officer for a long time. She left last year, and she's credited with the business success. You know, Mark Zuckerberg is very much the product and the engineering brain behind the company, but Cheryl's very much the business driver. And she would start every global meeting with this question: how many of you have had a hard conversation this week? So in a room full of the regional leaders, you know, half of the room would stand up, very proud. I've had a hard conversation this week. The other half would be sitting down. And she'd say, okay, those of you sitting down, think of a hard conversation you need to have and go schedule it. And then the ones that were standing, she'd say, don't sit down yet. The ones who have had a hard conversation, of you who have had a hard conversation today, between waking up and coming to this meeting. And, you know, 2/3 of those standing up would sit down and a few would be standing up. And she would say, those of you who sat down, you need to have a hard conversation today. Mm-hmm. And just think about it. It's so symbolic, because for the business leader of the company who in history made it to 1 trillion in market cap most quickly. So you know, a lot of things you can challenge about Facebook and argue about it, but you cannot argue about the business success it had in the short amount of time. So for that person to start a meeting by putting focus on a hard conversation, I think that's very symbolic. And her point was exactly this: if it doesn't become normal to have hard conversations, if it's not a normal thing, and you can think about feedback conversations, for example. There's companies where there's one feedback conversation a year. Well, yeah. How do you think people go to that meeting, right? They're oh my God, I'm going to find out if I've been doing things well or not. Those conversations need to happen every day, both the good and the bad, and not because the focus is on criticizing or what the person does wrong. The focus is on progress. The focus is on what needs to improve. The focus is on how do we keep that. So the more natural it is, and that's why she put that it was a bit of a game she did with the weekly and the today, because her point was it needs to be natural. It needs to be when something comes to your mind that is not right, it's not ideal, it's not the best way. Let's have that conversation. And let's reduce the barriers and the resistance and the pain of having that conversation, because this is the only way that the company will survive. If we start, you know, avoiding the hard conversations, then somebody else will be having them, and we will lose.
Right. Well, that makes it a very interesting culture, right? When you normalize the idea of stretching yourself to have that hard conversation, because I mean, I guess at some point they're not as hard anymore. Once it becomes more fluid to have those, you know, maybe you can call them crucial conversations when you've normalized it in a culture. But basically it's to challenge, right? And pointing to what you said at the beginning, if you have the psychological safety, right, where you welcome questions, regardless of your positional power, actually using your positional power to elicit questions from the rest of the organization, then you probably can move from considering them hard conversations to actually just having those crucial conversations, but more skillfully. So I wonder if there's a way, you know, where it can be less hard to have those types of conversations, and whether it has something to do with your fourth insight or not.
Yeah, I think that's why the fourth insight is right after the third, because the fourth insight is to hold your convictions lightly, and holding convictions lightly means, and I go back to the consciousness and the self-awareness and recognizing how we work, and the other very kind of fundamental piece of human nature is our ego. And the ego made sense, you know, millions of years ago, or when we were in, you know, in the jungle and we heard a noise of a wild animal that was going to kill us. Our ego said, I better get the hell out of here or else I'm going to die. So there's like a survival instinct in that flight. The ego, the hypothalamus and reptilian brain, it tells us, look, don't go asking for opinions. Just, you know, I know that this is true. I better get out of here. Mm-hmm. The problem, again, just like the victim, which is embedded in us, the problem with the ego and that knower mindset, that I believe my thoughts, is that it's not true that my thought is an objective reality, right? And it's not true in general, but think about in the corporate environment. I'm having a conversation, and I believe that, and I have an opinion or I have a perspective. That is, while I think that I'm being rational and I'm arriving at the one perfect conclusion, if you have 10 people around the table, chances are they're going to get to 10 different conclusions, some slightly different, some very different. And that is the point of cognitive diversity. The reason there's so much science now that demonstrates that cognitive diversity is great is because there are different perspectives, because we see things as we are. We see things with our biases and our experiences. And so having people with different experiences brings a more diverse spectrum of ideas. The problem is that when you have those 10 different people with 10 different perspectives around the table, but they're stuck in their knower mindset, and they're stuck attached to their ego, and my opinion needs to be right, then what you get is a bunch of egos fighting and not making any progress. So that is how we get to the hold convictions lightly, because and it's very interesting how it relates to all the other insights, because if you think about the first insight on build a horizontal organization, we talked about how the leader needs to be humble to listen to the younger people, because I no longer am the one who knows the most. So hold your convictions lightly. Maybe your experience 20 years ago told you the right solution was something. Hold that conviction lightly, because change has gotten much faster than it used to be. So hold your convictions lightly. Ask the younger people. Put a young person on your around your meeting table and listen to what they have to say, as opposed to intimidate them to stay quiet. If you think about the prior insight we just had about have a hard conversation, It's okay if we have two different opinions. I have mine and you have yours, and I'll hold my conviction lightly. Why? Because I recognize it's limited, because it's valuable, and I'll bring it to the table and I will share it because there's a value to that perspective. But sometimes I will win the argument and sometimes I will not, and that's perfectly okay, because that is the point of cognitive diversity, is that we will all bring different things to the table. So, and back to your comment, which I totally agree with, that the more it's normalized, the less anxiety there is about it. If you have two strong egos with that hold their convictions very, very strongly, very close to their chest, I can't lose, then they're waiting for that conversation. They're avoiding it at all costs, and there's an elephant in the room that's not being addressed, and problems are not being solved, and time is passing by and problems are not being solved. When they finally get to the table, it's explosive, because they haven't learned to talk about it as a normal conversation about things that need to be improved for the sake of progress. When you hold your convictions lightly, then having a hard conversation is just what you do to get to the right answer, and just what you do to leverage and make use of the diversity you have around the table. It's actually good. It's good news that there's different perspective, because that will allow us to get to a better conclusion. And would love to hear because I see in your face you're probably thinking of several cases right now, but can you tell me a little bit how frequent is that the difficulty for people to hold convictions lightly?
Oh, absolutely, because one is the avoidance, and then when they're done avoiding, then they just beat themselves, their heads together. They butt their heads together as rams, right? Running into each other with opposing views. And that's why I love to introduce like a distinction, right? When you have to be right or wrong in an argument. You have to win someone over with your argument, and as if everything is just rational and there's a very straightforward logic. When that's not the case, it's a combination of so many factors that are not necessarily logical, especially when it comes to human behavior, right? Our customers, our employees, our teams, ourselves, right? Now, instead of debating, why don't we consider those conversations deliberations, which is, I don't need to prove my point is better than yours, and therefore I win the debate over the loser. A deliberation, those kinds of meetings where everybody has a little piece of their truth, and that's where cognitive diversity comes into play. I see an angle of a problem, maybe from my expertise, because being a knower, having a knower mentality is not necessarily the same as having an expertise. You probably have an expertise. And with your fourth insight, I love it, hold your convictions lightly. You offer your expertise, it's a piece of the puzzle, but then it's light because then you acknowledge there are other pieces of the puzzle. And therefore, together, you put together the big picture and heightens the chances of reaching more intelligent solutions to your problem. So I love that. And I also love a question that's been handed over from the audience. I encourage everybody that although we'll spend some minutes at the end for Q&A, keep the questions coming. Here's one. Very interesting conversation, thank you. Why do you think those human aspects of digital transformation are usually underestimated? What do you think, Joao?
That's a great question. I think I have a couple hypotheses. I think one, and I want to hear your answers as well. I think you probably have really good insights on this as well. I think two main things. One has to do with consciousness and self-awareness. I think we're not as self-aware of how we work and how we think and how we have a natural tendency to be victims because it feels safe, how we have a natural tendency to think our perspective is objectively right. So that lack of self-awareness also leads to lack of prioritization, to put the focus on that, because it's just not in the radar. What's in our radar is what we see, it's what's tangible. It's back to the point of, why do digital transformation projects fail? Because they're addressing what's visible. Here it's analogous. It's we don't go to that human element because we don't have a big self-awareness of how that works. I think that's one part of where I think we avoid it. The other is a bit more similar to why do leaders not change a vertical organization, because it's not in their best interest to. Addressing the human aspects forces me to look in the mirror and forces me to recognize that, yes, I too am a victim and I too want to win the argument and I too. So I think there's also, in addition to the lack of self-awareness, there's also well, I'm not sure if I want to step into that conversation because I don't feel like I'm ready for that conversation yet. Would you have other insights on why this is so difficult?
Yes, I also have hypotheses, and again, we hold our convictions lightly, don't we? we use the keys that you to digital transformation to this as well. Well, I believe that digital transformation sounds very technical. It does. It sounds like technology, right? It sounds like there are hard facts that are that need to be, as I said before, pretty logical, straightforward, right? 2 + 2 = 4. And however, we know that that's not the case, but we're not equipped in the same way with the hard knowledge that we are equipped for the technical problems, to solve technical problems. Let's learn more, right? Let's get cognitive understanding of the problem, and let's use the rational brain. And I think we underestimate the human aspects because we weren't trained to look at that part of us. We think that that's all we have, and that the problems are solved with our logical brain, and we have much more than that. So I think we lack the language to talk about human aspects. I think the language that we came up with is not as stunning, right, as the hard business technical aspects of it. I think there's a lot to learn, and this brings me to my own question to you: is how do we train this, right? Because I think we need some upskilling to be able to address these human aspects. It's not in the curriculum of those who are now in leadership positions, at least not to my knowledge, right? How do we upskill in the human aspects of digital transformation?
Yeah, and again, it's back to that, whatever, 10-20% of digital transformation projects that succeed, they're the ones that start here, that start with the human aspects of it, and the raising the self-awareness and the consciousness of how things like being a player, being a protagonist, and being humble and holding convictions lightly. I think that's those are the ones that that drive the success of those projects. An example I would share from Facebook is if you go to the headquarters in Menlo Park in California, you will see this sign that you see here on the slide with the thumbs up in front of the headquarters. And if you go around the back of the sign, you see one that says Sun Microsystems. It's the one on the right there. And Sun Microsystems was a very large technological company that used to be in this same exact campus. And they went out of business because they were very successful in their day, one of the most profitable companies in the world for a very long time, you know, instrumental for a lot of the different technologies that you know that were at the root of lots of the products we use today, but they went out of business. And so the decision to keep that sign behind Facebook was to say, remember that you're only as successful as your latest success. Nothing is guaranteed, and everything changes. And the next company may be a group of very young people with very smart ideas. They can come and beat us, just like Sun Microsystems got beat. So I think from an organizational perspective, and that's why I think it's so interesting to compare, you know, an ex-monopoly and that transformation journey versus a digital native that, of course, is not without its challenges, but how it was already born with a lot of that humility built in, saying, look, we need to stay humble, and we need to have the hard conversations, and we need to hold our convictions lightly, and we need to invite different perspectives. And so back to your question, how do you train this? I think step number one is self-awareness, is teaching people. When people realize, oh yeah, I do have that childish thing of feeling innocent, and that makes me feel good. Yeah, I do have it. It is true that when I blame the other department, it is giving me a feeling of safety, and because I'm innocent. I get it. I see it. Okay, now let me step out of this. So then, the first step is self-awareness. Second step is having someone to show you when you fall back into that, because the muscle is very efficient at going back. So we can get it intellectually, but then the muscle goes right back. It's like your office that the manager took the office with him or her. And so having someone to point out, you know, this may not be the most conviction light way to have the conversation. You know, there may be a better way to invite other perspectives. So it's really around self-awareness first, to recognize that we are in that, and then having someone help us show the way. It's really like it's almost like learning a language. It's having someone you know, teaching you the fundamentals, the vocabulary, but then helping you practice and helping you improve the accent as you go along.
Yes, you know, an adage that I came up with in a way, and I like to repeat pretty much, transformation is a contact sport. You really need to kind of practice, and it's not getting it here, it's getting it and applying it. So I wonder, you had 5 key insights to share with us today. We went to the 4th. What's the 5th, Joao?
The 5th is I call it believe in something, and it's similar, you know, and we could have put it at the beginning. I think the believing in something has to do with have a purpose, have a why, start with why. Simon Sinek called it start with why. We could have put it at the very beginning. We could have put it in the middle. I put it at the end to kind of encompass everything else. And really what this says is, at the end of the day, people do not buy what you sell. They buy why you sell it. And you have the CEO and founder of Patagonia, which is an environmentally focused clothing company, outstanding quality clothing company, but environmentally focused. I went to a talk by Yvon Chouinard once, the CEO and founder, and he said, when people ask me what industry we're in, and my employees answer clothing, I say, no, we're not in the clothing business. We're in saving the planet business, and clothing is just the way we're helping to do that. So that is a why. That is a purpose. That is That is a reason that people, and this is again human nature, people connect with the why. People connect with the story. We're a species that we've told stories since we've existed, and then we started writing them down. But we connect with the stories. And then from a business perspective, there's an additional ingredient to this, which is the younger generations, the younger they are, the more so here you have a couple of data points, the more this is critical for them. So while our parents and our grandparents were like, you know what, I need a paycheck and I need a career and I need to, young people will leave a company if they don't agree with the values. And we need, and Generation Z will, I believe this year, or it's already the case, they will be the largest demographic and the highest spending demographic. So it's no longer a margin demographic. So both as employee and as consumers, they are accelerating this dimension of believing in something. As an employee, 77% find it's important to work at organizations with the same values as theirs. This is from a Deloitte survey. And as consumers, 89% choose to buy brands that are socially, environmentally conscious. So what you see there is the human nature of connecting with a story and connecting with a why, the reason we go to movies, the reason we love Netflix, that is only becoming more so with younger generations who are our biggest source of employees and our biggest source of consumers from a business standpoint. So that is the reason why it's so critical.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does sound like, before, let's say in the 20th century paradigm, right? A purpose was like a nice to have. Okay, it's kind of the bow, a very nice cherry on the cake. However, now it's just like the basic question that the new and younger generations and the future workforce are going to ask is, do I identify with this company? I see it in my own son and in the children of my peers as well. Like, I'm not going to study a career that doesn't fill me, my heart, and not just educate me, but I want to feel excited about it. So it's like, again, let's hold our convictions slightly, because I would, kind of react to my son saying, you have no idea what is waiting for you. Like, that's a luxury you cannot afford, my son. However, it's like, and I hear you, right? Like, that was me and my paradigm and how I was brought up. It's not necessarily the case of of other people, right? And then we can have a nice constructive conversation, right? And build the future together. Otherwise, stalemate again. So lovely. So thank you so much for that. I think we can have a final recap of the 5 key insights for today and open up the Q&A for other people in the audience, those who have not had the opportunity to ask their questions yet. So you want to recap and sum up your 5 key insights?
Sure. So digital transformation, majority fail because they stay on the systems process level. The 10, 20% that are successful, they've been able to go to the root cause, which is the human beings inside the company that you're trying to transform. So that would be kind of the umbrella of the 5 insights. And the first is build a horizontal organization. The vertical one worked for many, many years. The ones at the top knew the most, they no longer do. And you need an agility vertical organization doesn't allow you to have. And you can solve that structurally, organizationally, and mainly you can solve that through mechanisms to create a psychologically safe space for junior people to speak up. 2 is be part of the problem. As long as you feel comfortable in being a victim and putting the problem outside, then you're not being part of the solution. 3 is have a hard conversation, because if you are not talking about what needs to be talked about, someone else will, and you will lose in the market, and people will, and the relationships will suffer as a consequence. Hold your convictions lightly. We talked quite a bit about this before. Human beings have this sense of ego, and we have a pride in believing our perspective is objectively true. That is simply not the case. Our perspective is one of many perspectives, and by being able to hold it lightly, we are able to get to a better answer by integrating different perspectives. And lastly, believe in something. There is increasingly greater value in connecting with a purpose that inspires and connects people both as employees and as customers. And so those are the five at the root of a successful digital transformation.
Great, thank you, Joao. Well, here's a question. Let's see. Okay, so in your experience, which of these five key insights is the most difficult or challenging, and why?
Such a great question. I think the ones that are, most deeply ingrained in the human nature. And it's analogous to why do most digital transformation projects fail, because they don't go to the invisible piece of human nature. Here's the same thing, and I would say be part of the problem and hold your convictions lightly. Those are the two most difficult ones because they're the ones that are programmed in our essence, right? It's since we were young, we were incented to not be part of the problem, not be connected with the problem, because that way we're out of trouble. And even further back from when we were young, because it's in our genetic code. We believe our thoughts are objectively true, and that's simply not the case. So that's going back to the process of first self-awareness and then practice, to use your words. Those are the two that are hardest to change, but I've seen firsthand those two change completely. I've seen complete knowers that will never lose an argument actually invite different perspectives and say, you know what, I get to better decisions since I've invited new perspectives. So it is difficult because it's so deeply ingrained, but the good news is that once you do shed light on it, these are things that can be learned and can very significantly improve.
I agree. I think those would be my top choices as well, and not just because they're almost genetically coded, if to bring it to the extreme, but also because we've trained them for so long.
Yeah.
We've trained to be right. Like from school, like we have to ace an exam, getting the right answers. Right? You said we're incented to do certain things, and we've trained all our lives to be right. And then all of a sudden, it's kind of frustrating that now that I'm a leader of a digital transformation effort, now it's my turn to be wrong. Are you kidding me? It's kind of counterintuitive. So I think that's why they top the list of challenges, right? So, okay, here's another one, and I think we have time for one more, and then we'll wrap it up for today. What should be the role of technology companies facilitating digital transformations in creating this awareness on the human aspects of this digital transformation?
I think my way of seeing it is every single company has a responsibility and a responsibility, but also a need in order to be successful over the long term, to go to these more invisible aspects of transformation. Technology companies do, every other company does as well. If the question is how can technology companies help other companies, I'm not sure. I would start, I would apply the be part of the problem insight and say, I think each company should start with its own area. Let's create an environment that is psychologically safe for more junior people to speak up and to flatten that hierarchy. Let's create an environment where it's normal to have hard conversations, where people hold their convictions lightly and they search for the best answer, and that will hopefully have a positive effect, certainly on all the employees and stakeholders involved, but hopefully in others that have that impact as well. So it's I think it's every company's responsibility and ability to do this in their own place first.
their unconditional responsibility. Thank you so much, Joao, for sharing that. I love this conversation. Thank you to everybody. We're reaching the top of the hour already. From wherever you have dialed in from, we really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much. You will receive the recording of this webinar for all of you who have registered, and we will send you a deck, not just with the slides that we're showing today, but with a few extra bonus slides. And the next webinar, stay tuned. We will have a culture pioneer from the fellowship in July. We are proud sponsors of the fellowship. It's going to happen in November in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Please scan that QR code and find out more about it. We will love to see you there. All the culture transformation freakies in a way are so excited that this can happen. So thank you once again. Thank you, Joao, and have a good one.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Take care.